For those of you who don't know, a documentary made by Cassie J, known as The Red Pill, was basically protested by feminists in Melbourne, and it was pretty much cancelled on one venue but shifted to another. And this really does raise, in my view, an important question about precisely what exactly is going on with this documentary. And I will of course give some background about what I'm talking about. Most of the time when people want to make a movie, they follow a really quite simplistic approach. If Disney, for example, wants to make a movie, they go into their vast coffers of money, pull out a few $1,000,000 and say, get to work, staffers, get to work. In other situations where people want to make movies, they often use, of course, their own money, and potentially some money from backers or money from some government program or private program. Every now and again you do see examples of crowdfunding. Now, I have no problem with crowdfunding, except I have a problem with how the Red Pill has used crowdfunding, and I have the same issue with the Sarkeesian effect, I might add. Now, as a disclaimer, I'm by no means a feminist, an SJW, or anyone of that description, so to the people who are going to accuse me of that, yes, just know that I'm not. Essentially how the Red Pill documentary raised its funds was by using crowdfunding. At first, things were not going too well for the Red Pill documentary. It wasn't able to secure funding from the men's rights movements or any of the MRM donors. From my perspective, this is in part due to the fact that a lot of the movement is very skeptical about a random coming out of nowhere asking for money for a documentary that there really is limited information about. And this does, it did in essence cause, from of course what Paul Elam is saying, the documentary's funding to go nowhere. However, that only really changed when a bunch of free speech activists decided to open their wallets and, of course, give her the $200,000 to push her campaign forward. Now, I'll say it again. I've got no problems with crowdfunding. Of course, assuming that the product is a non-profit, but in this situation, the product is clearly being used to create a profit. And that, I take, as an issue, and the reason why is really quite simple. The Red Pill documentary is honestly pretty popular. It's looking as if it's going to be pretty successful, and it's not going away. Now, really, this documentary could make a lot of money. Money well above and beyond $200,000 that was taken from the community to pay for it. And this, to me, is wrong. And the reason why, I'll get to it. The people who put their money into this project, and, they had no guarantees that it would be successful, they had no creative control, they just put their money into it. And it just makes me laugh because these people don't have any rights. Cassie J pretty much went to a marginalized group of men, got rejected from that, and didn't get any funding from them, went to free speech activists and say, hey, give me money for my project. She took the money, and now is pretty much double dipping by making a profit off of a product she didn't put money into making. That to me is just a little bit sick. If you put your own dollars and cents behind a project and you decide to charge for it, then so be it. But the thing is, that is not what happened in the case of the Red Pill. That's certainly not what happened in the case of the Sarkeesian effect, where, I believe Davis Arini and Jordan Owen were given quite a significant sum of money to make a documentary, and you can't find that documentary on YouTube. You can definitely find it on something like Vimeo or Dailymotion, but you can't find that documentary on YouTube, and that's a documentary paid for by the community. But the community cannot access that product for free, despite the fact the community put the money behind it for that product's creation. So this really just does seem like a way that people are adopting to double dip the living crap out of the community. It's just hilarious to me that they would release these products at a charge without paying back the people who put hundreds of dollars into these projects. I mean, Cassie J's, audience, like the people who donated to her, they aren't going to see their money back, but she may very well see a massive return on basically no investment. I can't understand how this is something that has just been overlooked. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me that this isn't a topic of discussion in the MRM, the free speech activist community, and especially in MGTOW, why this hasn't really been brought up. Because it seems a bit, weaselish to me, or just off, that somebody would use other people's money for a for-profit project without paying them back. Am I wrong? Am I some moralist nutjob who doesn't know what he's saying? And, well, am I wrong? That's the question that I raise. I mean, it is important to keep in mind that the Red Pill documentary could play a very positive role in a really quite overdue cultural shift. Too long have upper middle class white women and feminists controlled the narrative on most social and political issues. This is especially the case in the United Kingdom, and it's also a problem here in Australia. I mean, we have a Minister for Women, for fuck's sakes, the same group of people who are less likely to be killed, injured, or less likely to be victimized as a whole when you compare them to men. And I'd say that this documentary could potentially be a positive influence to force, more men into the discussion. It's about time we actually have a serious discussion about just how often things like domestic violence happen. It's time to have a really serious discussion about what the fuck gender equality even means. It's time to discuss some of the, fine print that modern-day feminists are putting forward. It's time to actually think about what they're saying and advocating for. And it's time to reevaluate what they are saying. It's time to reevaluate and to change. And I think that this documentary could indeed do a good job of that. And I can certainly see why, to people like Paul Elam, this documentary is a good thing. But I still think it's important that the issue of funding, be in the back of our heads, because this isn't a small matter. But, as I said before, I could be wrong. Maybe the whole funding issue doesn't matter, and that this is a necessary evil to push forward the social and cultural changes to really get rid of this, insidious feminist influence over just about everything. To conclude, to those who wish to censor Cassie J's documentary, and to those who wish to censor her documentary in Australia and prevent her coming to Australia, I will say this. Freedom of speech belongs to everyone, not just to you, and not just to people whose ideas you agree with. Freedom of speech is, I would argue, far more important than even voting. And frankly, freedom of speech is far more important than reinforcing some highly ambiguous, incredibly broad, poorly defined, and hypocritical standard of what you consider misogyny. Freedom of speech belongs to everyone, and if Cassie J wants to make a documentary sharing her beliefs, views, and findings, then she's welcome to do that. She's not a rapist, a child molester, or anyone of that description. So, for that reason, Cassie J is welcome to Australia. That's all, and if anyone wants to add something, then by all means feel free to comment below.